When style becomes an identity crisis. Has fashion become an endless race for aesthetic validation? Fashion used to serve a purpose, marking identity, reflecting culture, belonging to a movement. Today, it changes every 6 months, forcing people to constantly reinvent themselves in an exhausting pursuit of social validation. In the past, fashion evolved in sync with cinema, music, and art. Now, it appears and disappears in TikTok cycles of 15 seconds. One day, the clean girl aesthetic dominates Instagram. The next, it's balletcore, then weird girl, and a month later, no one remembers. The paradox is brutal. We want to be different, but only in a way that is socially acceptable. We want to stand out, but not so much that we alienate ourselves. We want identity, but we live in a world where identity is volatile. The result? Fashion burnout. Aesthetic exhaustion in a society that has turned personal style into an addiction to instant validation. Today on 277 Broadcast, we explore how fashion has shifted from a cultural narrative to an identity crisis. How did fashion go from coherence to chaos? Fashion once had clear cultural roots. Today, it emerges as a fleeting digital whim without structure. Before, aligned with artistic and social movements, punk symbolized rebellion, grunge reflected 90s disillusionment, had long life cycles, people dressed similarly for decades, reflected clear cultural narratives, the psychedelic 60s, neon-heavy 80s, minimalist grunge in the 90s. Now, generated in digital spaces, disconnected from other cultural expressions. Changes at algorithmic speed, a trend goes viral on TikTok and dies within months. No longer follows a progressive evolution, just micro-trends with no connection. Conclusion. Fashion has shifted from a meaningful cultural construct to a consumer-driven phenomenon fueled by hyperstimulation and social dopamine. Why has style become a source of stress instead of self-expression? Why does modern fashion create anxiety rather than personal expression? Zygmunt Bauman and Liquid Modernity tells us, in the past, identity was stable and built over time. Today, it is so flexible that it has become volatile. Fashion reflects this. People no longer dress according to a fixed identity, but constantly adapt to external changes. It's no longer about self-expression, but about keeping up. Instead, hyperconnectivity generates the crisis of the self. The constant exposure to new styles and aesthetics forces people to endlessly rethink their identity. Identity no longer feels self-constructed, it is imposed by the fast-paced cycles of social media. The goal isn't to find a personal style, but to avoid being left out. Fashion is social dopamine. Changing aesthetics is no longer a personal exploration, but a reaction to digital validation. In the past, a style change was a long-term decision. Now it's about instant gratification. A new photo, a viral outfit, a brief moment of attention. Conclusion. Fashion is no longer about personal expression. It has become a hyper-accelerated social necessity, creating anxiety instead of identity. Is society losing its sense of identity? Maybe the problem isn't fashion itself. Maybe society has lost its ability to sustain a stable identity. Before, aesthetic movements were tied to ideals, revolutions, and cultural shifts. Now, fashion is nothing more than a series of fleeting trends that expose our collective inability to build a consistent cultural narrative. Fashion burnout isn't just about consumer fatigue. It's a reflection of a society trapped in digital adolescence. Conclusion. Fashion no longer mirrors culture, it mirrors its crisis. Is fashion burnout a symptom, not the disease? If all of this is true, what does it mean for us? Fashion is not inherently superficial, but its acceleration has drained it of meaning. Aesthetic anxiety is a reflection of a collective identity crisis. We don't constantly change styles out of pure desire. We do it because the world itself has become unstable in its own narrative. Maybe fashion burnout isn't really about clothes. It's about our inability to sustain identity in a world designed for constant change. So next time you feel the need to switch styles, ask yourself, is this truly what I want? Or just another echo of the digital noise around me? Subscribe to 277 Broadcast. And remember, if fashion is a reflection of identity, maybe modern fashion is telling us that we no longer know who we are.